And maybe not, too. There we go. Here at New Life Assembly of God in Findlay, Ohio, Pastor Dutch has been talking about our capacity to serve, our capacity to give, our capacity spiritually, a capacity just to walk with God and some things like that. And I wanted to pick up on that theme this morning and talk about capacity and your capacity and a breathtaking capacity, your ability to do things for God, to live for Him, and those kinds of things. And so let's talk for just a few minutes about our breathtaking capacity. I asked artificial intelligence to generate some sort of a picture that had to do with breathtaking capacity, and this is what it came up with. And so you look at it, and great, we're climbing a mountain, and it's wonderful, and we've got a great view, and the colors are crisp, and then we realize that to get to that view, well, we're just a little bit out of shape, and climbing requires a lot of energy and exertion, and maybe it's not as good of an idea. Have you done any climbing? You get halfway up and discover it's not as good of an idea as it was when you were down at the bottom? That's what breathtaking capacity is like. You sign up to serve or to do something for God, and it's a great idea. I mean, for some of us, it's a hurdle just to sign up, and then we do that, and when we sign up, then we have to start. And it's something not quite like that. It's a little bit more like that. When someone says, you know, you're going to have to talk to people and maybe even share your compelling story with people. I was on the streets of New Orleans during Mardi Gras a few years back and watched a student literally hyperventilate when they were a crowd of people and sent out to share their story with other people. And then we realized we may not have the capacity that we thought we had. And we may not be able to do everything that we thought we could do. Now, part of the problem with capacity to serve is that some of the things that we do in the church are things that we do in other places in life, right? Everybody serves donuts. And it doesn't take a whole lot of skill to learn to serve. How many of you have donuts from time to time where you work? A few, not many. You know the reason you don't have donuts where you work? It's because you didn't stop and buy them. I'm just saying. Jackie, I didn't see you raise your hand there. I was there when your school had donuts one day. Places had, right? Everybody has donuts. Everybody has greeters at the door. Walmart has greeters at the door. All sorts of people hold doors. If you went to an elementary school of kindergarten, first and second grade, they go back to school this week, you would see them teaching kindergartners and first graders to hold the door open for other kids when they come in. Everybody does that. All sorts of places have music, bars have music, and some of the things that we do here look a whole lot like things that are done in other places in life. And we are tempted to think, well, it doesn't take a whole lot of spiritual capacity to do those things. Anybody can put 3 donuts in a cup and put it out. And if all you're going to do is just serve donuts, you would be correct. But I wonder if it's about a little bit more than that in church. I wonder if it's about more than just holding the door open for someone. I wonder if it's about holding the door open for someone, seeing a parent that's struggling to get their kids in by themselves and congratulating them on bringing their kids to church. I heard all of those kids talking when we were trying to have a serious moment of prayer a little bit earlier, and all I could say was, that's the way the life is, isn't it? It's better to have kids in your church than to speak in a church that has no kids. And so some of the things that we do here, I mean, you can teach a lot of people how to teach. You can go back to school this week with students, and you'll see really good teachers who know how to teach. And of those teachers who are really talented and know how to teach, they mold and shape minds much like we do here in church. We take time to learn the skills so that we can learn one more knot to teach kids in Rangers how to tie knots or how to do something else here in church. We go to the Salt Shaker event this coming Saturday just to learn a few more skills to be able to improve in our service. And it's at those moments that we discovered that it isn't just about the skills. It's about whether or not you are sufficient in and of yourselves to do those things for Jesus Christ. Paul addresses this in 2 Corinthians chapter number 3. And if you have your scriptures, whether you brought a paper copy or your phone or however you're accessing scriptures this morning, would you swipe over to 2 Corinthians chapter number 3. If you do not have the Bible on your phone, that's easy to do. In both the Android and Apple iOS, you can download the Bible app as well as others. It's just what it's called, the Bible app. When you get there, you'll push Bible at the bottom, and then you'll push up the top. It'll tell you where you are. You push that up there, and it'll give you a drop-down menu. You're going to go to 2 Corinthians, which is almost all the way down at the bottom, and you're going to go to 3, and if you need help, that 3 comes after 2. You need more help than I can give you right here this morning. 2 Corinthians chapter number 3, and we're going to read verses number 4 through verse number 6. 2 Corinthians chapter 3, beginning with verse number 4. Such confidence as this is won ours through Christ before God. Not that we are competent in ourselves to claim anything for ourselves, but our competence comes from God. He has made us competent as ministers of a new covenant, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. 800 years before that was written, Isaiah wrote something that went like this in Isaiah chapter 2. He said, "Why are you trusting in man when all they have is mere breath in their nostrils?" Why would you trust in other people when, that's almost insulting, right? All you do is breathe. Why would we trust in you? It's God's way of saying all you have is something that's inside. You have nothing more than that. If you really want to make a difference, if you really want to see something that's outrageously fantastic, you're going to have to trust in God's capacity. You're going to need to let Him develop a breathtaking capacity in you if you want that to happen. Because otherwise, all that you really have is something from your own ability. It is the Spirit who gives breathtaking capacity, not anything that we do ourselves. We are powerless in and of ourselves, sometimes even to take that first step. To say, okay, I know we've been talking about it and I need to get involved some way in serving others. If you need to do that, you should see Steve Nelson, who will help you discover your next step. For some people, that's a huge first step. But some of us who have been serving for a little while, I've done this before. The temptation is not to say that, but to say something different. To say, I've done this so long, I wonder, I know how to put thoughts together. I can write them down. I can write a sermon. See Dr. Burr Schilling in the back, a fabulous preacher. He can write a sermon and can do it without the Spirit's help if he wants. You've done it so long, what you do in church, that you really don't need the Spirit's capacity. Unless, of course, you wanted to make a spiritual difference. Because if what you wanted to do is see a transformed life, you're going to need Him to do that for you. You are unable in and of yourself to transform a life. That is God activity. And so you need to partner with Him and find out what that looks like and find out how to develop that kind of capacity. And 2 Corinthians gives us a 3-step process for developing that kind of capacity. The first thing that we need to do is to reject substitutes for God's wonder. Because so much of the time we end up substituting in our lives for God's wonder and for God's power. We end up substituting for things that are really stuff that only God is able to do. I read through the Bible and I see everything that God did, and I think, some of those things are only things that God could do. They're so spectacular and so monumental, and if you want to see those kinds of things in your life, you will need God to do that. We need Him to substitute in just some basic things in our lives. For we all have one point in time we're a place of being spiritually dead. And if that's you this morning, I'd like to talk to you for just a moment about that. For if you're in a place right now of being spiritually dead, you can leave here being spiritually alive. If you feel hollow and dead inside, there is no reason to leave this place feeling that way. For He can come and give you a life, new life inside that is bubbling over. Those things come only from God and from His ability to touch us and to change us. And you have to be willing to reject substitutes, for we are not sufficient in ourselves to claim anything as coming from us, because we simply can't do those things. For it is only through God that we can discover those things. And then we try to turn to other stuff. We think that maybe caffeine will help a little. Maybe you're a social media person. Maybe you've seen this meme. Tried starting my day one time without coffee. My court date is pending. We try other things that maybe will wake us up or get us going, and we think that those things will help us and build our capacity. They're all like substitute sugar. They leave a bitter aftertaste. The only thing that really gets your capacity growing is God Himself. And if you try to do anything other than that, this is telling you right here in 2 Corinthians that you will fail, because you are not capable in and of yourself of doing those things. It is a God-like capacity. We are not sufficient in ourselves. He is the only one through us who is sufficient. And so we have to learn to turn to Him so that we don't end up substituting things that aren't real, substituting cute stories for real wonder and awe, for illustrations and sermons or other places in life when we're teaching in the church that sound cute. And is at a service one time when they had a testimony service. I'm glad that most of you don't know what those are. But for those of you who do, they are often entertaining more than edifying. It was an opportunity for people to stand up and share what God had done in their life. But in the absence of God doing anything real, I shouldn't talk that way, but I just really felt that way when this lady popped up and said, I was in the mall this last week, and I went into this, and she named the name of the store, and I was looking around, and I saw this candle, and I thought, oh, that's pretty, and I picked it up and looked at the bottom to see how much it cost, and there in the bottom was written John 3:16, and it was just so neat. Okay, that is kind of cool, I guess. If you want to substitute real great, breathtaking stories for a cute little story, sure. But what I really want to see, and maybe what you want to see in the places that God has put you, are truly amazing, God-like, breathtaking moments where God brings transformation in someone's life, something that only happens when you partner with Him. For you do not have the capacity to do it on your own. You are in need of Him doing it. And sometimes we start with really good intentions on that, right? We go back to school. It's Thursday if you've been counting down. And we start the day, and we've made commitments all summer long. I will trust in God, not in myself. I will trust in God, not in myself. And then we get an hour into school. I remember being there as a student. We get an hour into school, and we're no longer trusting in God, but we are trusting in ourselves all over again. The important thing is to come in every week and to recommit yourself, to refuel and to recommit so that you are able to go out again and say, let's just try this again and see what God has, and continue to say, I am not going to substitute for God's real wonder and glory. I'm not going to try to substitute my strength for what He wants to do. The greatest need in our time happens to be something that the church would be very capable of doing. In the last couple of years, 2 or 3 years, study after study has been published. I, in just a few minutes, found 3, and I know that there are about 8 studies that have been done on people about through the ages of 18 to 25. 58% of people in one study between the ages of 18 and 25 said that they had no purpose and no direction in their life. Some even in follow-up interviews said that they really didn't even know if it was worth it by that point. Perhaps that's why 36% of people in that same demographic suffer from anxiety. You are twice as likely to have anxiety if you are an adult, a young adult, than you are if you are older. Perhaps that's also the reason why the suicide rate in that group has just gone way off the charts, almost into epidemic mode, because they lack purpose and lack anything else that says, this is what I'm living for. If that's the case for you this morning, let me tell you, there is something that is worth cashing in everything else that you've had and living for and making a commitment. There's something worth committing your entire life to, a purpose of saying, I will live for Jesus Christ, and I will let Him fill me all over again. I will let Him bring me to life and continue to put that life inside of me. And if you have substituted anything else for that, you have substituted the real for something that is fake. And you want to make a commitment this morning that says, I'm going to change that in my life. And in our hour where the need is so great, the church has decided to populate our social media with everything but hope and purpose. I could go on and on about that. It would be nothing but snarky, and it would get myself in so much trouble. I have seen the most ridiculous things posted by Christians in the last 2 months about politics, as though you could bring about an eternal change politically. When did that ever happen? Other things that people have posted on social media, you won't change people spiritually with anything other than spiritual things. It's a God-like thing to do. And so we have to reject substitutes for God's real wonder and begin to make an exchange. Exchange the substitute for something that's real, but our sufficiency is from God, who has made us sufficient to be ministers of a new covenant. That kind of capacity comes only from God. It's something that only He could do. The Old Testament uses the word breath rather regularly to talk about the Spirit of God. Now, there are multiple words that you can use in Hebrew for breath and for spirit, but there is one that is interchangeable. It's not the one that's used all the time for breath or for spirit, but there is one that is interchangeable. And so let us just consider that for a moment for what God is really saying when He says, don't trust in people who only have breath in their nostrils, is trust in people or in me who has an eternal spirit that I use and that flows to other people and touches them and fills them and brings about a great transformation. That's why Ezekiel in chapter 36 says, I will give you a new spirit, because He will take your breath, which frankly wasn't much to begin with, and He will transform it to something spectacular. Way back in the day, and I'll date myself with a story, Oral Roberts, who was a great television evangelist, went on TV in 1988 and said that if he didn't raise $8 million, God was going to kill him. He didn't, and he didn't. Went to visit my grandpa, who was an old retired preacher in that time period where we were supposed to raise the money, and my grandpa was really upset about it. And he said something like this: God does not need to threaten Oral Roberts to kill him. He merely needs to take his little finger and put it at the bottom of his nose, and he will be dead. Only a God-like capacity to do things. For God is a God who has unlimited capacity. And when you exchange yourself for what He has, you discover a whole new capacity. Perhaps that's why just a few verses later in chapter 4 it says this: for we have this treasure in just jars of clay, something cheap and disposable, and all-surpassing power that is from God. We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but we are not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but we are not destroyed. For we always carry around in ourselves the surpassing power that comes from Jesus Christ. And we try so many other things, none of which really work. We have to be willing to make a great exchange to see things work. We have to exchange our words for His words, so that what comes out of our mouth is something that He would want us to say. We have to exchange our thoughts for God's thoughts. And Pastor Dutch has been talking about that over the last few weeks, developing a way of thinking that's God's way of thinking. We have to be able to exchange our vision for God's vision, so that when we see people, we don't just see an individual, but we see everything God wants to do in that person. A couple of years ago, I was teaching at a church in California. Pastor picked me up from the airport and took me, after a few other things, we went to the church. And as I was going into the church, I met one of the young ladies who I would be teaching that week. And as we talked just for a moment, and it was a very brief moment, it was as though I looked at her and saw something that I don't know anybody else was seeing. I saw somebody who had a crushed spirit that God wanted to do something spectacular inside. And so I just waited to see what God would have and how God would bring that about. And finally, the moment came where I could tell her, it just seems like maybe someone has crushed you deeply and God wants to bring you to life. A year later, I heard story about how that had unfolded over the past year. Discovered that God had done something spectacular, and she had in fact received healing for things that had been in her life for quite some time. Because God wants to do something extraordinary. He wants to bring you to life and bring the world around you to life. Instead of not having that kind of life, the emptiness, he wants to do something far more spectacular. Earlier this year, I was preaching in Seattle at a Ukrainian church. A gentleman was sitting way over there on that side, way in the back. It was a pretty big room, and it was very full. And I came to the end, having talked about bringing the world to life, and said, if you'd like to do that, if you know that you don't have that kind of life and you'd like that this morning, an older gentleman, who knows how long someone had been praying for him? Who knows how his wife had been praying for him? Who knows how his kids had believed God for maybe 10 or 15, 20 years? I didn't have the opportunity to ask, but he raised his hand, yes, that's me. And he walked forward in front of all of the people who were assembled there and said, I need God's life inside of me. Would you pray for me that I will get that? Because that's what God wants to do for you. He wants to bring you to life. He wants to exchange everything that you've brought to him for everything that he can give. He wants to exchange your presence. You're walking into a room and not having much to offer, to God coming in with you, to having all of him to offer. You ever been in those moments where you said, I really don't know what to say? Well, I teach the classes that tell people what to say when you don't know what to say. And here's what I tell them. Nobody knows what to say. So instead of trying to come up with something that really may be more insulting than what it's worth, you might just sit there and say, I'm sorry. But sitting there a while will help. Sitting there a little while with the Spirit of God inside of you will help even more. As God does something, bringing them to life, doing something inside of them, that's only a God-like thing to do. For as long as you are the sole author of your story, you only have breath. 2 Corinthians chapter 3, where I asked you to turn, just look a couple of verses right before, one verse right before what we read. You are a letter from Christ, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of human hearts. When you are the author of your story has way too many twists and turns, and none of them are things you wanted. But when he is the author of your story, he brings about something beautiful and spectacular. The question for you is, who will author your story? Will you be the one to do that, or will you let him be the author of your story? Will you let him this week, in whatever it is that you will do tomorrow, will you let him be the author of those moments? Will you exchange whatever your thoughts were, your agenda was, for whatever he did? It could be that your to-do list will look very much the same when you do that. It's just that that to-do list will have more purpose. Because now just instead of doing those things, you're doing them for looking for an opportunity to see what God might want to do, to bring about a great transformation. I asked artificial intelligence to give me a picture for someone getting a new heart. I got 4 very cheesy looking pictures with a fake heart on top of someone who is laying in a hospital bed with 4 people standing around them smiling. Because artificial intelligence, when it gives you pictures, everyone is always smiling. I didn't like that. So I said, could you give me a picture of somebody getting a new spirit? I got this new ageist weird stuff with bubbles all over the screen, and someone standing like this, and a bright light is coming down and touching their hand, and I thought, no, that's not it either. So we kept trying, and we came up with this. The same person sitting next to themselves after they've had a transformation. The same kid sitting on their lap after they've been transformed. Having taken kids in whose mother was more from the first camp, I can tell you that the kids do in fact look happier when mom's not like that. But when mom is not like that. That's the kind of transformation we're talking about. For you are not sufficient in yourselves to do that or to bring it about in other people. It is only his transformation that will do that. It's only his capacity. And if you want to see something truly breathtaking like that, you have to rely on his capacity working in you, or you will never see anything like that is that truly amazing. Gaze at his extraordinary capacity, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. It might even be unlimited capacity that he will bring about inside of you. A capacity that will be something for that you were not aware that could happen before. That's why we are told to lean not on our own understanding, but in all of our ways acknowledge him. That's why in Zechariah chapter 4 it says, not by might, not by power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord. That's why it says in Psalms to delight yourself in the Lord and he will give you the desires of your heart. It's because in and of yourself you don't have the capacity to do those things. It requires that God does them for you. It requires that God exchanges your breath for his. And the only way you see something truly breathtaking is if you've had that exchange. Oh, you may see something that is kind of nice and wonderful and awe-inspiring, but if you want something that's truly transformational, something that will cause you to just stand back and say, only God. Speaking to a group of young people about a year and a half ago, I talked to them about what they were chasing and asked them, what are you chasing? And I didn't know that the person who I'd end up talking to that night, couldn't tell that God was doing anything extraordinary in them. I did know her. Then I gave an opportunity to respond, and so a bunch of people came forward, and she sat over there off to the side and began to cry. And so I worked my way around and sat down next to her, and we talked for a little bit, and a little bit more, and a little bit more. And at one point in time in the conversation, I asked her this question. Has everything you've ever done spiritually been fake? Honestly, yeah, she said. Well, I saw her again a year later, so that would have been just a few months ago. And I asked her, how's it going? How you doing? She said, I'm doing great. Then I thought, well, let's make sure that she understands what I'm asking. So I said, so after our conversation last year, how are you doing with that? And she said, I'm doing great. And then she told me what God had done in her life, and it took my breath away. For only God can do that. Only God can bring about a radical transformation in someone's life when they say, I'll commit to him and see what he wants to do. And the only way any of us have the capacity to watch him do that is if we have exchanged our power for his power, our breath for his Spirit. And so that would be the opportunity for you this morning to make that exchange of your own breath for his and watch him do something outrageously breathtaking. Everybody close their eyes for just a moment. I wonder, after hearing this morning of what God has spoken to us through his word, I wonder if perhaps you have said, that's me. I'm spiritually dead inside. And when you talked about that, you were talking to me. I need to make a commitment this morning for him to make me spiritually alive. I need to make some different decisions than what I've made. And I need him to enter into my story and make some changes. If that's you, would you just look up at me to make a commitment so I'll know who to pray for? Absolutely, yes. Yeah, just look up at me so that we can make eye contact and you can say, hey, would you pray for me? I need to make that kind of commitment. Yeah. God is speaking to people as they say, I need to make a different commitment. Now, as we come forward in just a moment, as the worship team's going to sing, lead us in a song, I wonder when you come forward, if you would say, you know what, I need to make that exchange of my own power. I've been trying to do some things in my own power, and I need his capacity to get it done. If you just raise your hands when you come up and say, God, I want to make that exchange. I need your breath, your Spirit to breathe in me and give me a different power than what I've had before.